Always true.
We ask the question, what is needed in the world? Is that going to be?
Pisac, novinar i urednik u Guardianu. Izveštavao je iz Bosne i Hercegovine tokom rata. U svojoj knjizi Krvnikov, trag, Julian Borger piše, kako kaže, o najvećoj potjeri za zločincima u moderno doba. O traganju i hvatanju balkanskih ratnih zločinaca, o trenutnim odnosima u regionu, o aktualnoj izbegličkoj krizi, ali i o stanju slobodnog novinarstva. Sa Borgerom smo razgovarali u Sarajevu.
First of all, welcome and thank you on your time. I would like to start from the end. This book was written before the Radovan Karadzic verdict. What is your comment on that, and what were your expectations?
My expectations were that he would get life, so I was surprised. I know there are technical reasons why he may end up longer in jail with his 40 years, but nevertheless I think the symbolic importance of the word life was missing, so that surprised me. I'd been briefed ahead of time that it'd probably only be the one genocide count, so I wasn't surprised by that. But I suppose I was relieved that the tribunal had not sprung one of its surprises on us and delivered something ridiculous.
Although the people who survived and the families of the victims are not satisfied with this verdict, do you think how important is the fact that crimes committed here are recognized and characterized as genocide? Is that some kind of justice or satisfaction?
This word genocide has been politicized and made so all-encompassing and all-important that all anyone cares about is this word genocide, whereas the word crime against humanity is also a pretty serious thing. And these are terrible crimes, and to call something a crime against humanity is also a very big thing. And so to some extent, you know, the politicization of the word genocide has got in the way of perceptions of justice, because it is this sole focus. But I can understand from the point of view of the victims individually and Bosnia as a nation, the need to have this basic fact recognized, that the aim of what happened between 92 and 95 was to wipe a people off the face of the map.
And why so hard? Why do we have here in the region so different views on the same event? And why so hard to some politicians to say the word genocide?
One word, I think, nationalism. It is far harder to confront something as uncomfortable as the fact that we, our community, carried out these awful crimes. That's a very hard thing to do. Much easier to take solace in this in lies and in hazy recollections of a noble past. That's easy, and I think politicians pander to what is easy for people. It's easy for people to block out the past, not face an uncomfortable reality. And if you want to get elected, you go the easy path. And I think it's a failure that will hold Serbia back for a long time, and by extension will contribute to holding Bosnia back.
What is your general view of the tribunal's work and the work that is done there? Do you think it has justified its purpose?
inevitably this is going to be one of those glass half full, half empty answers. Obviously it was bedeviled by flaws and wasted money and bad decisions, but it is unimaginable now to think of it not being there, and for all these people, Karadzic, Mladic, all the killers, to still be on the loose. So the very fact, and this is what I wrote the book about, that it made a list, a partial list inevitably, but 161 people, and all of them faced justice in one way or another. And the justice at the end of the day may have been flawed, but they all faced, they all in one way or another faced the tribunal, went before the dock.
Do you think that tribunal can be some kind of a model for nowadays?
The trouble is that the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia and the one for Rwanda were the product of a very particular time in history, where in the Security Council Russia was prepared to go along with the creation of these kind of organs, these kind of judicial organs that would apply law across national boundaries. Russia is no longer prepared to do that. So we're not going to see any more of these ad hoc tribunals, except maybe in Africa. But what we have now is a system where instead of having these ad hoc tribunals set up by the Security Council, we have one big one, the International Criminal Court, supposed to be a permanent court for everywhere in the world, but without the support of the US, of Russia, of China, India. It is it's not powerless, but it is restricted in where it can function to Africa. So it raises the question, what are we going to do about Syria? They're building some really strong cases in Syria, but there is no tribunal, and for the moment no prospect of a tribunal, and that is, to my mind, a really serious problem.
Is there a chance in the future to be recognize the importance of the tribunal, because we have so much archive there, so much documentation? Do you think that it will be recognized in the future?
It was a judicial process, and we would dearly love to have one for Syria and Libya. And now you talked about the archive, and I think that will be really important, because what we're facing now is, just 20 years after these crimes are committed, denial that they ever took place. I mean, there was a opinion poll in Serbia not long ago that showed a small minority acknowledged that crimes were committed in Srebrenica. So it is important that there is a historical record, a incredibly detailed historical record, so that in generations to come people can return to it, and there is the raw materials of truth in the face of the temptations of denial.
Let's talk about book. You were here during the war, you witnessed many things. What is your main motive to tell this story to the world?
What really motivated me was just the instincts of a journalist. These were many untold stories, and when as a journalist you come across stories that are interesting, exciting, but most importantly untold, no one knew about them, then there's a strong motivation to go and explore and to write about them. But of course there is an emotional core to this, because of it, to witness the killing of so many innocent people. And then I was here at the end of the war, and there were 64,000 NATO troops here, and they weren't doing anything about it. Was, for Bosnians, for observers like myself, absurd, obscene, and so it became something that I personally followed very closely when they eventually did start the arrests, because to me that kind of justice, the justice for for war crimes, crimes against humanity, is vital if we are to try and define who we are as human beings.
You said NATO was here but doing nothing. How do you explain that? What do you mean by that?
The American military at that point was very risk averse. I mean, it's hard to remember now because so much blood has been spilt in Afghanistan and Iraq. They've lost so many people. But back then, it was after Mogadishu where they'd lost some soldiers and it had been on television, and no commander wanted to have any casualties. It was said that under Clinton, if you were a general, you would not get your next star on your lapel if you had any casualties under your watch. So they came here really risk averse, and they referred to the task of picking up these fugitives from the tribunal. They called it mission creep, i.e. we are here to keep the peace, we don't do anything else.
Tell me, this book is a kind of a document. Tell me something about your research process and what were your sources?
Most of the sources are people from the special forces and from intelligence and diplomats, and inevitably it was hard because all of those people are under oath, really, not to talk about what they did. This effort, this achievement, tracking down and arresting these war criminals, was the one unquestionably good thing they did in their careers. And so although most of them were unwilling to speak and I had to get used to a lot of rejection, there was this minority, I would say, maybe a quarter, who were bursting to speak because they were so proud of what they'd done.
And tell me in particular about that process of arresting and searching for the fugitives. What do you think on that? Do you think it could be shorter, better, or?
I mean, it's absurd, really. Here you had the world's most capable intelligence services, the best resourced intelligence services and special forces in the world, mighty militaries, and they took so damn long about the whole thing. So first, and this is an answer in several parts. First, they didn't want to do it, and then when they did decide, right, we're going to do this in '97, they did it in the Pentagon way, in the U.S. military way, which was we're going to just throw huge amounts of resources, huge amounts of manpower to achieve this goal, because that's how the US military works. You do everything on massive scale. Huge plane loads of soldiers came in, a general came in, about 5 or 6 colonels came in, because they all wanted part of the glory, because they weren't, before 9/11, they weren't doing anything else. So huge numbers of people turned up, and of course the Bosnian Serb, you know, the party members, Karadzic supporters saw them coming, because there were so many of them, realized something was going on, and the word went round, and the secret was blown, and the whole initial operation was called off. So they learned very slowly, painfully, that big is not better when it comes to manhunting, and that's a lesson they took with them to Afghanistan and Iraq.
You said at first the international community didn't want to react. Why is that?
The first reason was the fact that they thought wrongly that it would get in the way of a peace deal. I mean, they were very focused on, they wanted this war in the Balkans to be over. It was very destructive. It was right in the heart of Europe. So they were trying to negotiate a peace, and yet that meant dealing with the killers. There was a great public thirst for some kind of justice to be done, so they said, okay, well, we'll set up this tribunal, never intending it to be effective. They never wanted it to get in the way of making peace with Milosevic or Karadzic or whoever was necessary to make peace with. And so they tried to stifle it. They tried to strangle the tribunal in its cradle by cutting off funds because they were under the illusion that Milosevic was just about to make a peace, and they can make the war stop. And so Milosevic was able to string them along as long as he thought he needed to create his greater Serbia.
You mentioned the Dayton Peace. Do you think it stopped the differences among people, or in some way it supported it or stimulated it?
It was seen as necessary to stop the immediate killing, but it put the peace into a straitjacket that it hasn't been able to escape from, and it creates a political reality that is defined ethnically, and so prolongs, in a way, prolongs the core aim of the war, which was ethnic separation. So, you know, what was used to stop the fighting has been a huge burden on the country and its reconstruction.
How do you see the development of the country from Dayton to nowadays? Stagnating or moving forward?
You've got to say stagnating, unfortunately, because of political paralysis, because you have half the country that doesn't want to be part of the country and participate in those state functions that are essential for it to work economically, politically, and so it is stuck until this underlying political issue, constitutional issue, can be resolved, and that is a really hard thing to do because of the persistent mindset of Bosnian Serb political scene.
Are you aware of today's relations in a region, political relations between Serbia, Bosnia and Croatia? What do you think about that relations of those countries?
I mean, that's a really complex question because there are so many sides to that question. I mean, both Croatia and Serbia would like, I mean, obviously Croatia is already in the European Union. On the whole, you have the impression that Vučić would like to go in the same direction, although, you know, he's keeping his options open. So they will pay lip service to the cause of Bosnian political territorial integrity without showing really the kind of enthusiasm and support that's necessary to push Bosnia, which is really, you know, has been the victim of their territorial ambition and remains, you know, the victim of those ambitions. But they haven't shown the real enthusiasm and political will to support Bosnia in moving forward and overcoming the constraints imposed by Dayton.
What do you think that's the key of reconciliation in a region?
Telling the truth, I think. You've got to tell the truth about what happened. You're not going to get anywhere by lying. And I was really struck when I went last year and spent some time in Srebrenica, that you have a Bosniak population there, and they live alongside Serb neighbors, and they share in the work of the municipal government. But all this is premised on the fact they're not allowed to mention what happened to them. It's not allowed to talk about what happened to their relatives, to their Bosniak neighbors. The whole veneer of cohabitation is built on a lie that they can't talk about the truth. Until that happens, and I fear that is a long time away, but until you can tell the truth about what happened, real reconciliation is going nowhere.
We have now a huge refugee crisis. How do you see the role of Balkans? Is there any understanding for those people regarding that people here have been in the same situation not so far ago?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it explains a lot of the individual acts of generosity that you see in the countries of the former Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, against that common humanity are the nationalist narratives, which are fueled by the failure of the rest of Europe to take a proper share of the burden, hoping that all the burden will be taken by the Balkans, and they will just keep the problem at arm's length. In doing that, by helping so little, they are stoking the nationalist backlash in these countries, and that is not a long-term strategy, nor is it a humanitarian strategy.
Do you think this refugee crisis indicates instability here on Balkans? Every situation can be critical, can make some kind of political arguments between neighbors and countries here in Balkans.
Yeah, of course that's true of the Balkans, but look at the rest of Europe. Look at what is actually quite a manageable situation in terms of the overall numbers of refugees and in terms of the size of Europe. This was not an unmanageable problem, but it was a problem that was not managed. It was not managed by Europe, by the EU, and that failure to manage it has had all these political consequences with the rise of the far right across Europe. And in a way, you look at the Balkan countries politically are doing pretty well given the size of the strain. Compared to other countries, you have this swing to a backward-looking, right-wing nationalist government and populist politics, but that's true across Europe. So if you take Europe as a whole, it's not just the political fallout, it's not just a Balkan problem.
And where is the end of this crisis?
The end of the crisis is a long way away because of the failure to deal with the slaughter in Syria. The Western governments, in large because of the debacle in Iraq, didn't want to get involved. But what we're seeing now, of course, is the failure to act can have as serious consequences, humanitarian, political, geopolitical, as action itself. Political action, military intervention is hard. It's hard to get it right, but doing nothing has huge consequences as well, and we're seeing those unfold now.
Tell me, let's talk a bit about journalism. You won many prizes. You were part of the team that won a Pulitzer. You do investigative journalism. How hard is for journalists to do the investigative journalism?
Really hard because of the problems facing the industry. The problems are enormous because of technological change. Because internet advertising is all going to Facebook and Google, this is a really serious threat to independent journalism, because you need money. You need to be able to tell a group of journalists, just go off, look into this. You don't have to come and report back until you know what it's all about, even if that's months. That is an expensive thing to have to do, and if there is no business model for journalism, for that kind of journalism, other than a philanthropic act financed by rich people, then this is a really serious problem, not just for journalism, but for democracy.
Some expert claims that it was worse, that now is worse than 1990s. How's that possible that we have such a situation now in modern days?
It's a good question. I think part of it is this swing to the right across Europe. It's not just a Balkan problem. You have the erosion of press liberty, for example, in Hungary. Maybe it may actually be worse. the collapse of the journalistic business model. The old business model is you wrote things, you put them in a paper or you put them on television, people advertised, you sold the newspaper, and you got money and you're able to do your job. Those business models are collapsing, and the only people who can afford to run newspapers, often to run private TV channels, are oligarchs who've done business, who have done deals with the ruling party, the government, and that is not an environment that is conducive to free speech.
And do you think that all the guilt is on politicians, or do you think there's some guilt in journalists themselves?
Of course, I mean, it would be silly to say journalists are blameless. I mean, that, you know, journalists, being human, have always been flawed. We've always got things wrong. We've always, you know, gone for easy answers. But that's, in a way, it's irrelevant, because that's always been the case. What has really happened, what has really changed, are two much bigger things. One is political change and the swing to the right and away from liberal democracy. And the second is the technological changes that have made the old business model for journalism collapse. So in a way, as you know, the virtues and failings of journalists have nothing to do with it. These are bigger forces at play.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
For me too, thank you.
Thank you.